Everybody, welcome to La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. I am your host, Ruben Mendive, and today we have a brand new guest here via social distancing on Zoom, try to keep it quarantine friendly. So I start every podcast with having my guests introduce themselves. So your name, how you identify, and a little bit about yourself for the audience at home.
Perfect. My name is Edwin Alexis Gomez, and I am a queer Nicaraguan-American writer. My pronouns are he, him, and girl if there's some cheese, may honey.
My follow-up is always, where are you from? So you sort of touched on that, but I wanted to get a sense of what that means to you when somebody asks you, like, where are you from?
Definitely. Let's see. When I have to consider where I'm from, I think it's a loaded question, and it goes into even my childhood. So I'll explain. So I am born and bred Angelino, was born in Glendora, California, in a hospital that doesn't exist anymore. And my family actually lived in East LA maybe until about 2 years before I was born, in which they moved to Baldwin Park, California, the home of In-N-Out, fun fact. Okay. And for me, I would always get angry at my cousins when I was young if they would say that I wasn't Nicaraguan. So for me, for some reason, downtown LA where my grandmother lived was Nicaragua. And so for me, I've always held on to my Nicaraguan identity very staunchly, very proudly, because of the stories of both my parents and my grandmother growing up.
Yeah, and let's get into that. Tell us a little. I like to get like a sort of family history just to get a sense of like where we come from. So what is your parents' story and your grandparents even?
Okay, y'all get the popcorn. This was totally a novela. I bet most of our parents' stories are. So my parents actually met when my mother was 16 and my dad was 17 in Nicaragua, specifically in Esteli, which is in the north of the country. A lot of tobacco plantations in that area, a lot of, factories and cigar rollers are from that area. And so my dad actually was born in Managua, which is the capital. And his family currently resides about 15 minutes outside in Tipitapa. And my mother was actually born in Esteli, but she was born in León, and spent most of her life in Esteli. And so the story goes that my grandmother loved one of my dad's best friends for my mother to be like her partner. And my mom was just not into him. She was into my dad, obviously. And so they would send each other correspondence through my aunt, my tia Teresa, who currently resides in LA also now. And basically, they did it really old school. My grandmother made my dad have to have basically visits that were supervised. So it was both of them in the living room and my grandmother right in between them. So you can imagine that kind of environment. And so this is where my grandmother messed up and led to me being here, which is she eventually locks my mom in her room. And my dad comes around and he's like, hey, where's Gloria? Today's the day that we're going to, talk the way that we have been. And she said, my grandmother basically said, I don't want you to come around here anymore. I want you to forget about my daughter. She's not for you. And so my mom heard this from her room and yells at the top of her lungs, Bayardo, yo soy para ti y tú eres para mí. Nos vamos a escapar, right? So really, really novela, y'all, which is why I'm a little extra in my own writing. And so they did. They freaking ran away from Esteli in the north to Managua, Nicaragua. At the time, they only left with their suitcase of clothing. They got a little apartment. They had a little twin-size bed frame only. And every night they would lay out all of their clothes on this twin bed to sleep on, right? And so my dad ended up getting a job at the soap factory. My mom ended up selling some of the smaller pieces to the people that lived in the apartment. and then the soap factory burnt, and then they just kept living their lives, you know, like they started just doing a lot of the different things that they did in Nicaragua. And again, this time it was like Somoza, the Somoza dictatorship. It was just at the precipice of the Nicaraguan Revolution. So a couple years outside of the Sandinista Revolution. So that's kind of like how they met. And then something to, just a quick note is my mother was the only sibling. She was the youngest and the only one who wasn't from the same father. And so the father of my three aunts who are older than my mother was this Texan man from, I believe, Brownsville, Texas. I don't remember his first name, but I know his last name was Henderson. And through that in the 70s, on his deathbed, because they had a strained relationship since my mom wasn't necessarily biologically his. But on his deathbed, he basically adopted my mom. And so through that, I believe my mom came into this country in 1973. For her, she had to actually move here to keep her citizenship. So she came before my oldest brother, and she came pregnant with my second oldest brother, Alan, and spent a majority of that time here in the States by herself. Like, she'd always tell me that she would only allow herself to cry in the shower because she didn't want anybody to know how much she missed her family and like her son and my dad. And so kind of that led to my dad coming over, joining her, him becoming a naturalized resident. So that was kind of the migration story of my family. This all happened, like, honestly, before a lot of the really tough stuff happened in Nicaragua. I have family members who, you know, have sons who disappeared, so they don't know if they died or if they're alive somewhere else. So I think that while there was a lot of suffering in that separation, there is also a kind of a gift from also being spared from a revolutionary war.
When your mom came over here and everything, did they settle in Los Angeles at first?
Yeah, they did. So my mom settled in the San Fernando Valley with my aunt Lillian. She came and she kind of settled in there, but was kind of basically my aunt's housekeeper. So you know, there was a power dynamic between their sibling relationship, but a lot of love. My mom was always someone to be very forgiving, and you know that we're still family regardless. I think it's just we have such a breadth. Like every family has a breadth of people who heal from trauma, people who cause trauma. But at the end of the day, all of us are there to learn, you know? And so I think, like, she settled here. And then I know when my father moved to meet her here, they ended up settling in East LA, like on Soto Street.
Yeah, and what did they do for a living while you were growing up?
Okay, so growing up, it's kind of funny. So my father really wanted to figure out what he wanted to do, and so he always, one of his like badges of honor is that he passed on the first try his plumbing certification exam, you know, because it was like 1,500 questions, and he's like, I passed it, I got my certificate to be a plumber. And so he started his own plumbing business, Gomez Plumbing and Heating. And he did that for many, many years, had many, many clients throughout Los Angeles. And then my mother, for the longest time, so this is kind of another invested answer. So my mother learned how to roll cigars by hand from my grandmother, who learned from my great-grandmother. So my great-grandmother Servanda taught my grandmother Juana, who then taught my mother Gloria. And so since my mom was a roller in Nicaragua when she came, she actually went to La Plata Cigars, which does not exist anymore. She basically was their master tobacconist. So she would roll cigars, like house cigars, and then she would be the one to help customers with paying for their order once they walked into the humidor and all that stuff. And she did that for over 20 years. And what she decided to do, probably when I was maybe like 10, was my mom was such a badass worker. She would wake up at 5 a.m., drive to downtown LA, park, open this place, make cigars all day, get home with traffic over here in Baldwin Park, um, and then make dinner, uh, and then roll in the garage under the table for about I'd say 7 p.m. to midnight.
Wow.
Then she'd go to bed and do it all over again Monday through Friday, right? And so what she did was she had customers that would buy cigars from her, and with that, what she did was she did that long enough to save the capital that she needed to open her own cigar shop, where she would roll them, where she could pay for the material, any of the overhead costs like molds and the presses, pay other rollers, pay the rent, pay all the overhead, right? And so she made it so that she could, open her own business as this Central American business owner. And she did it. And what I'll say is, actually, the shop is still in existence today. We're in our 23rd year of having El Beso cigars. So it's called El Beso cigars. And it was called that because my mom felt that the relationship between a cigar and the cigar smoker is so intimate, like a kiss. And so that gives you a breath or an idea of where some of these threads when it comes to writing come from, right? So my mom ended up having the shop and needing help with the shop. So my dad ended up actually abandoning his plumbing business. He's still certified, still keeps that up to date. And he ended up going and helping her because she was dealing with a lot of things that I'm sure we'll get into. And so to this day, my dad still works at the shop. And I actually work at the shop as well. So that's what I do outside of all of my writing and production work, is manage our El Beso cigars.
Oh, very cool. And so, yeah, let's get into that. Let's get into like you growing up. Describe it to us, to somebody that's never been there, and like sort of what your childhood was like growing up in your household.
I would say Baldwin Park is a transitory city. It's a city that might not be your destination. It's something you drive through. But what I find from Baldwin Park is a primarily immigrant community of Latinx folk, primarily Mexican American, I'd say. In the last couple of years, we've had an influx of a lot of Asian American folks and Asian folks. As rent prices have risen, I've noticed that the community has been changing, including your sometimes you get your hipster with the really wonderful Irish wolfhounds, and sometimes you get that family that is working really hard at raising their children the best way they can. I would say that Baldwin Park is one of those places that I would say in the past had a very bad rap, in the sense of like gangs and drugs. But I would say within the last 15 years, it's really changed. I think that it's definitely, I mean, again, it's the birthplace of In-N-Out. And I know that they're sometimes problematic when you look at politically, like who you support and who they support, right? So, but it's always something that's been fun. It's like there's this replica of the of the first In-N-Out that you could go visit. It's also very close to the mountains, so you're like honestly 10 to 15 minutes away from being on a beautiful hike that makes you feel like you're nowhere near the city. Specifically like Chantry Flats, and all of those things. The Santa Fe Dam is up the way from me, so a lot of people go biking there. The Ren Fair happens literally like 3 miles from my house.
Oh yeah,
I'm like super nerdy like that. So, but yeah, that's basically what you're here to expect when you come into Baldwin Park.
who were you growing up during that time? Like elementary school as a kid, like. And you mentioned you had siblings, so like, what was that all like?
Yeah, totally. So I'll preface with I was a very unexpected baby, and by that I mean like my mom was on birth control. I was one. I was the one. I was like that kid that shows up and is like, "What's up?
Yeah.
I'm ready to be born." And so I guess the birth control my mom was on like was rendered useless if you lost weight, which is crazy to me. So she lost weight, and it was like her health kick is what messed everything up, right? So then I was born, and I was born significantly off from, I guess, my siblings, you could say. So my brother Dennis, who I really love and appreciate, and who's an artist himself, is about 9 years older than I am, and then
Mm.
and then my oldest brother and I, we have an 18-year gap between us, so we have a
Oh, wow.
whole lifetime. And then, fun fact, my niece Christina was born literally a year after me on the same day from my brother Joe. So it's like I was an uncle at a year old. So it was always an interesting dynamic, right?
Hmm.
Of it essentially being an only child at one point in my life, where all my brothers were already of age, and I was still trying to figure out my place in the world, and all of those things that I wanted to do. And so then, like, moving into elementary school, like I was always a really great student. I was super nerdy. I was like a teacher's pet. Um, Going real deep, like kindergarten, I've always been really tall, really big, like a kid, like to the point that when I was 3, Disneyland didn't believe that I was 3. So my mom would have to take like my birth certificate and be like, "No, he's 3 years old.
That's all
Like,
right.
I'm not paying," you know? But the one thing that was a consistent recurring thing that would be feedback to my mom was that I was really protective of the smaller kids, the younger kids. So when anybody would pick on them, I would like intervene. I would, and that was really important to me, and it still is, because I think that we forget how hard being young is, and then when you add layers of identity to that, it just makes it that much more difficult. And so for me, I've always been someone to advocate for the underdog, or to just make sure that everybody's safe. So growing up, I would be really honest with you. The way I describe everything before I came out when I was 15 was like I was kind of the cask of a person. I was someone trying to mitigate their relationship to the world, trying to figure out who they were, but knowing that things had to stay secret inside of me. And it wasn't because my parents were a certain way. It's literally the world. It felt like the world was that way. It was not built for me. Um, every time when I was young, I remember, I know that one thing that happened when I was young was in daycare. I was crying one day after daycare, and my mom was like, "What's wrong?" And like, I literally told my mom, I'm like, "Oh, it's this boy called me a maricon." And I was like 5 or 6 at that point. And so I think that there was always this thread or this thing, right? This nagging feeling of self protection. And so I'd say it wasn't until I came out that I started really thinking about what aligned with what I wanted as a human being, right? Not even just romantically, just like once I was honest, it opened the floodgates to discover what it is I wanted to do. So I was always, again, I was class clown. I was always joking around. I was very social, but I was also a very good student. It was very important to keep up my grades, and to make my parents proud, because I knew how hard they worked. It involved a lot of not being able to go see me in a play, or not being able to go support me in the artwork I was a part of growing up. But I also really had to shift that in my mind in a way that sometimes people can't, which is, I said, I would tell myself, your parents are doing this for you. They're not here right now, but it's because they're doing all of the things to provide for you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So like, let's get into that. Like I always like to know people at high school age.
Yeah.
it's just like, I always ask, like, who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how did other people see you? So like it seemed like 15, you said, was a very pivotal time. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, what was up with you?
Ooh, okay. So I'll start with what was up with that bitch, Edwin, in that time. I'll say that I went to Cal Poly Pomona's high school. I Poly, short for International Polytechnic High School. And the idea and the cornerstone of that high school was that the world was moving towards group work, was working towards teams, right? And so every semester centered around a different project, and you have your core team, and then all the subjects would kind of interface, right, with the core project. My class was literally 92 people. Very small, very hard to hide. A significant amount of queer people, considering that small, amount of students in my class. But all of us kind of dealing with our sexuality in different ways. Some of us being very open, and others of us feeling like, oh, like I wish I could be that open, but I can't, right? And so I think it was like approaching. So sophomore year was literally when I came out, and I came out in French class. So to add to the drama, I came out in French class as bi, and I think I was on the bi now gay leader plan. I was just like, I'm gonna say I'm bi so that then I can, ease in. And then like 15 minutes passed. Like literally, I looked at the clock and I'm like, it's been 15 minutes since I came out. I'm like, do you really want to keep lying, bitch? Like, do you really want to keep lying? So then I was like, nah. I'm like, so I turned over to my best friend. I'm like, actually, I'm just gay. Like, I'm just gay, And so my whole journey was, people finding out through specific friends, also trying to figure out who it was that I was in that time. Like when you're a baby queer, everything's new. You really don't know like how relationships work. If a relationship is supposed to emulate, your mother and your father, which I feel like regardless of if you're queer or straight, like there's certain aspects of their relationship that carry into you and into your partnerships that you should be aware of, right? But for me, it was a full journey that I was on this trajectory to be an art therapist in high school. I was like, I'm going to be an art therapist. I'm going to use art to heal people and for them to heal themselves. And so for me, I remember that my capstone project was about art therapy specifically. And then I remember that we had this one class. Well, okay, our South African chemistry teacher, Mrs. Strauss, was super religious also. Mrs. Strauss ended up being a muumuu wearing, mullet rocking, platform shoe, like 5'4" woman with, I kid you not, like she did not believe in blending, with literally like tri-colored eyeshadow, like one stripe of pink, one stripe of blue, one stripe of purple. Okay, like this is so just have that in your mind. Okay,
It's a look.
it was a look, honey. It was like drag queen moment, like everything, right? But I was talking about my sexuality in this one in this one project that was relating to everything. And I was exploring religion and sexuality and how an artist navigates that in their own work. And she ended up giving me like a bad grade on it. And I remember I took it up with her, and I remember I was talking shit with some of my friends in that class, and she like stopped class and was like, Edwin, if you have a problem with me, because she had an accent, she would say like iodine and aluminium. But she basically just told me like, if I have a problem with her, I need to talk to her. And so we discussed that project. And she gave me that bullshit of like, well, I can love you, but not love what you do. And so basically I just had to make peace with her, just make peace with her. And the reason why I had to make peace with her was because this was senior year and she literally passed the day before our graduation.
Wow.
So that was a journey, guys.
Yeah.
It was a full ass journey with her. But what she taught me was that I had to be unshakable regardless of what someone believed. I had friends who would tell me shit in high school like this was a test from God that I was put under that I had to pass. And I thought, wow, that's really rich that I have this extra test other people don't have, you know? So I would say that it wasn't until I started searching for specifically LGBTQ Latinx spaces that I started genuinely not giving a crap what anybody thought about me or my sexuality or being Latinx.
Yeah, and what were those spaces? Like, did you find those in high school, or was it like?
So I actually found it outside of high school.
Got it.
With actually with Bienestar Human Services. I'm not sure if you're so Bienestar Human Services is one of the largest Latino orgs that specifically focuses on HIV prevention and services for those with HIV. And so they primarily service LGBTQ folks who are Latinx, positive and negative. So I was plugged into their Sabores group. I was like so into it. I was like a volunteer all the time, and
Mhm.
eventually it led to me actually being a staff member. And so for a while, I was like mentoring people who are my age, which is hilarious. But like leading them through that program, I was based out of South LA and out of Hollywood, and a lot of the people that were in that position before I was there were like, there are no LGBTQ people in South LA, and I was like, I know that is some bullshit. So so I went from literally having two youth to like it expanding to like 20
Oh,
like
wow.
youth, like literally LGBT, like everybody. I made sure to open that space up for everyone. And then that journey led to having a mentor. Like I feel like my search has always been like I want a mentor. Like I want a mentor, right? And so it's kind of hard because like, and especially a queer tour, right? Like having someone who you look up to who's living a life that you want to live. Like for me, it was one of the leaders that I like would go to their group, and then it wasn't until I became staff that they kind of disintegrated in front of my eyes, and then I had to realize that like we're all human, you know. We all need to go through our just our journey.
And is that like what you studied in college? Like, because you mentioned you were like sort of on the track to be an art therapist. So
Mhm.
like, what'd you do after high school?
So after high school, my journey into the IE went deeper. So I ended up going to the Claremont colleges. I went to Pitzer College, and when I went in as a psychology major, and I
Mm.
decided that if I were going to pursue art, like art therapy, I should take art and psychology to have some kind of framework. And then, and then my first semester, I just would feel like psychology was one of those things that was very natural to me, and so I would feel like no shit, like people don't know this already, right? Like,
Mm.
and you know, like when you read any subject and it feels like that, it feels like it's difficult to tether yourself to it,
Mhm.
right? And so the thing that I tethered myself to um, was art. I had like my art professor. I started in mixed media, so I did mixed media and sculpture, and a lot of my leading up to this, I had always written poetry. And by the time I hit college, I was just tired of poetry. Like, I reached that point with the medium where I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I started exploring using visual language to convey some of those emotions I was feeling that were very conflicted and hard to deal with.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I went hard into art, I would say. Then I totally redid my major and just went for art. And then slowly I was like introducing the writing again, and then I was like, okay, so you're an installation artist, you're exploring documentary film, and now you're starting to write poetry again, and you're starting to write short stories. It just seemed like the natural progression was film. Like let's make film. And what I found by being like, big ups to the Claremont colleges, appreciate you. There's this track record. If you guys want to lean in a little bit, there's this track record that the Claremont colleges can teach you how to talk about art, but not make it. Pro tip. It's kind of like that. So I had all this wonderful liberal arts education and philosophy to delve deep into. And then when it came to form, specifically screenwriting, specifically how to put together a film and experiment in film, that was its own journey for me that involved basically just supplementing a lot of art theory and film theory. And I mean, I felt so lucky because shout out to Gina Lamb, and I mean, there was Jessica Lawless. There's so many people, Eddie Gonzalez at the Media Studies Department. Like, all of these people were anchors into this idea that you could make film, right? In an institution that doesn't necessarily make film the Hollywood way. And so then you're dealing with how to make art in a way that helps community. And that really was something that I still to this day feel is a cornerstone of my work, is how do we excavate our own stories, our own narratives, by experiencing another narrative, right? But I'll tell you, college Edwin really went on a whole detour before film really hit.
Yeah, and at what point did you start making your films and like started taking writing more seriously in the sense of like something that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I think it honestly was something, and I just want to say this too. I think sometimes when you don't have proof that you can do something, it adds time to you doing it. And so what kind of happened was, I knew I wanted this dream. Like, writing, directing was this dream, this impossible dream that this, working class boy from fucking Baldwin Park, whose parents, worked so hard, who were so set on him being a therapist. Like, my mom was so set on it, where it was kind of like, I mean, it was rough, Ruben. It was rough because my senior thesis show was about the conquest of Latin America. So I animated some codices that indigenous artists did that were basically asked to be made by the Spanish. So I animated all of that. I harshly lit myself in front of a green screen. I keyed out everything, and literally the codex was all happening inside of me, right? And then in that, I created these 250 bent golden crucifixes out of wood that were just suspended in the gallery space I wanted. So I felt very lucky. And then I had traveled to Nicaragua that semester with my mom, and it was the first time she had gone back in many years, like I would say 30 years. There's nothing worse than a parent walking in to your art show that you've spent so many hours of your life on, and they turn to you and say, "This is it." and I really thank my brother Dennis, because he was like, "Edwin, like, come on, our parents don't get this shit. Like, don't worry about it. Like, don't let that faze you." But I was shook for sure. And so then I really leaned into a lot of my nonprofit work at that time. I was kind of like skirting the outskirts of film. Like, I'd get hired on to like film house and ball performances, like the categories, like literally pose, but in LA, like the West Coast ball scene, with my professor, one of my favorite professors, Gina Lamb. brought me on, and then finally I actually became hold on, let me think about it's the global local urban fellow for intercollegiate media studies. Like that was my position. It's a
Mm-hmm.
mouthful. And so the idea is that like I would be working on things that had a global scope but were also locally engaged with orgs and plugged in. So for me, being there, helping, like just helping produce this content, teaching the students how to ethically work with community and with orgs, teaching them why story is important and what narratives we want to tell about the work an org does. So it's like I was really like to the point where I feel like Gina Lamb felt like my trajectory was documentary, you know, because that's what we were doing. I think we worked on at least 50 projects while I was there, as a fellow, and I had a hand in every project in some capacity. If it wasn't actually going to the site with the students to film, it was in the edit room teaching them how to edit, what to think about. That ended up coinciding with um, sorry, I think I need to share something personal, which is what I ended up defaulting on one of my student loans, at this time, and I ended up picking up another job, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
I was working at the college, and then I was like working graveyard at a domestic violence shelter, like literally answering hotlines, um, like being there with the residents and helping them through like some of the worst times in these folks' lives, you know? And so the what took the forefront in that time in my life was helping others, was helping students learn how to work in community, how to help those orgs reach more members to access their services, and then also on a whole nother level, like I was pushed to do deep dives into character study of why people do what they do
Mm-hmm.
and what we live, because most of the people that I worked with were Latinx, were immigrants, were undocumented, were black, you know, we're Asian, we're dealing with a lot of layers, you know. And so and shout out to Women's Shelter of Long Beach, like they do some great work in Long Beach. And I know that this pandemic has been hard on everybody, and I know we all know that domestic violence is worse, and some people are quarantined with their abuser, you know. So a lot of love to anybody who's living through that or has lived through that.
I've got you sort of mentioned that you took a trip with your mom to Nicaragua.
Hmm.
So, just like I feel like this is very Mexican of me. Like I don't know that much about
Yeah.
Nicaragua or most of Central America.
Hmm.
Um, so but what I've gotten a sense of is that you have like a very good sense of like your personal history, your family's history, and like so can you sort of talk about like your connection to like the homeland, you know?
Yeah. Va pues. Ahorita lo hago. I'll put on my Nicaraguan hat for you
Thank you.
anytime, Ruben. And I'll preface this with this is my Nicaraguan experience, too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my mother, uh, it was okay. That's a film in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I documented some of it. One of my projects in college was until 2008. Nicaragua was one of two countries in the West that still criminalized homosexuality at the time. And I say homosexuality because that's how they said it in their articles. So it wasn't until 2008 that that shifted. And so for me, when I went back, part of it was also exploring queerness and being Nicaraguan,
Mm-hmm.
right? And since I was still a baby queer, and since I wasn't able to, and I mean, when you travel with your mom, you kind of can't go to the gay club,
Yeah.
go party it up in Manawa and be like, yeah, whatever, mom, right? So I was able to interview someone who was queer, talk to him about his experience, and talk about a lot of the experience of trans women in Nicaragua, and to think about uh, this idea of revolution inside of a revolution, right? Like these micro revolutions that happen, Also going back to all the places that had emotional anchors for my mother, right? Going to Leon, going to this little city outside of Leon called La Mina de Limon, which has a copper mine. My mom used to teach there when she was 16. Another novela moment. The owner of the copper factory was American, and he had this redheaded son who was white and freckled, and he was in love with my mom, like super duper in love with my mom, because my mom was pretty. If you go on my IG, you could see my dad was hot too, you know. Um,
Weird.
it's just you see them and you're like, wow, okay. I was like, I get it. I get why both of you were like, we're running away
Yeah.
together. And it's just kind of funny to, like, my mom chose love and not wealth, right? And
Mm.
that was such a cornerstone for me in this idea of love. It's like, yeah, that's the trajectory that sets you up a certain way, but at the end of the day, that's not the most important thing. What matters is that you love someone, you know. And so anyways, so we're revisiting all of these things. We go to my mom's elementary school, and the thing is, my mom had very few pictures of her as a little girl, very few. And so we go to her elementary school, okay, and we're going through every year, everything is like on in the hallway. In the hall, we get to my mom's year of graduating, her picture is gone. Like someone took her picture, and for me and for her, it was like a really painful thing. But for me, I guess the way it hit me was like, wow, someone loved you that much. They wanted your picture, whoever that was, right? And for me, I think like it was such a bittersweet thing for my mom to revisit things. Like we visited my grandmother's finca that she grew up on. My grandmother was like those old school, like that old school novela of the woman with the rifle and the horse. That was my grandmother. Like my grandmother was like the local, you know, medicine woman, the local person to help you with anything that's going on, the midwife if you're going to have a baby, like, because in that space, you know, there's nothing. So I would say that the matriarchal line of my family is very strong, you know.
Mm.
um and so my mom actually passed probably almost 5 years ago now. And so that moment and that trip, um it just, in Nicaragua, it not only is it naturally beautiful, I think what it is, it's a great way of looking at how people who don't always have a lot are so kind and so generous with what they do have. Like for me, that's the Nicaraguan spirit. I mean, the saying goes, "Nicaragüense por gracias de Dios." So there's 5 million people who are like, "I am Nicaraguan because it's God's gift, you know, to me," right?
Yeah.
Also, Nicaragua is known as la tierra de poetas. You know, like it's where the father of modernism in the Spanish language came from, Ruben Dario, another Ruben, right? It's one of those things that and also the story goes that, you know, Ruben, that we are related to Ruben Dario, whose real name was Felix Ruben Sarmiento. Sarmiento being my grandmother's maiden name. Um, so there's always been this poetic bent to my family, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, yeah. And just, because I've seen some of your short films, that's really how I would describe them too, like poetic. There's like sincerity to them.
Mm.
Um, just like a very like emotional rawness and like intimacy to them. So
Hmm.
so I want to talk about like when you transition to like being a filmmaker and like
Hmm.
and producing and releasing stuff. Like how did that come about?
It was again, it's like you need proof, right? And so for me, I just needed someone to like. I feel like I was just waiting for someone to be like, "You, Edwin, you need to write. You need to make films. like I see it in you, right? And like it's funny because you don't necessarily get that, but I remember that I decided that before I wrote, I would deep dive into acting because I was
Mm.
like, okay, I should understand dialogue, right? I should understand the emotional tone of things. And so my first deep dive was in acting, and I was taking acting for like a whole year. Did not want to go the trajectory of like I'm an actor, like here's my headshot, I need an agent, I need like not going about it that way at all, just literally for craft's sake.
Mm.
So so 1 year was all acting, and then the next year I was like, all right, Edwin, it's time to do a year of full writing. No more acting, just deep dive into writing. Read as many things as I could, but honestly, YouTube was my writing salvation in being able to ingest so many different breadths of knowledge when it came to writing, when it came to form, when it came to theme, when it came to character building. Like those things genuinely helped me. And then I would say my fate was sealed when I took Josefina Lopez's Latino Screenwriting Academy,
Mm.
which she did, I believe, now maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. That changed everything. Being in a space with basically all Latinx writers was unheard of for me. A lot of what Josefina shared was really helpful and was able to bridge it, right? Bridge all
Mhm.
this random ass reading, this random ass video, the films I loved because I used to watch the director commentary all the time. And then finally, you know, at one of the things of that academy was that someone was going to win to get their film produced, the
Oh wow.
short that they wrote, um, which I was one of the people selected. So that journey was its own journey too. I think that what I had envisioned was this piece I wrote that really came from the loss of my mother. Because mind you, this was the way that I dealt with the loss of my mother. Like I
Mm.
literally had to. I literally like my Saturn return was my mom passing. Like
Mm.
literally, that's how it aligned. And my choice, I had two choices. I was either gonna end it all, or I was gonna live. And literally, I say because it was that clear cut for me. Is like either you're out, homie, or you're all in. Like, what are you gonna do? And I decided to be all in. And I decided to be all in because I knew how hard not only my parents worked, how hard every single person in my bloodline worked to get me to this place,
Mm.
right? To
Mhm.
be the one in the promised land, right? To say, um, we could have discussions about America and all the shit that's wrong with it right now, but the promised land, either way.
Yeah.
Um, I think that that's kind of where that added some steam, right? That win. And in that, I also met a lot of my collaborators, and I met one of my producing partners, Angela Pedraza, there, who is such a badass writer, director, producer in her own right. I met my editor from my last film. I met a lot of some of the writers that have been on the podcast prior were part of that specific Latino screenwriting academy.
Mhm.
And then due to creative differences, and due to uh, the dream grew, and the dream wasn't that my piece would be directed by someone else. It was a point where basically Joyride, which I wrote there initially, was the way that I dealt with my mom passing. It was Juana is literally the embodiment of my mother, and my grandmother Juana is this character, right? Um, and for me, once I got once I got that back, and it was like, I know that you, like, basically Josefina was like, I know you're resourceful, I know you can do this, I'm going to give this back to you so that you can go figure it out. You know, I know a lot of people would take that as a loss. A lot of people would stop their journey there. But for me, I was like, honey, you're that bitch. You got to make this happen, right? So for me, with Angela, also, because Angela really, really pushed me to direct this, to do this, to take this on, that we could do this, right? And Angela was also shortlisted for her piece that she wrote in this lab as well. And so, long story short, I didn't know how. I never applied to a film grant. Didn't know how it was going to happen. Knew that I couldn't. I knew that I couldn't. I didn't want to crowdfund. I had no. Thing to hold on to, if that makes sense. I had no proof. And so I ended up directing this 1 minute short for Outfest Fusion called Quédate Callado. Shout out to Georgie Goico and Eddie Anguiano and everybody who worked on that 1 minute short. And then I had proof because it ended up winning a grand jury award at Outfest that year. It screened right before Skate Kitchen at Plaza de la Raza, and everything just shifted. And I was like, wait, out the gate, your first narrative piece that's just a minute long gets an award? Like, you won the Screenwriting Academy, like you were selected for that. Like, how many other things you need to be proof, right? So that was kind of the journey there. And so then I ended up submitting to LPB, Latino Public Broadcasting. They have this short film grant. I will say they just opened their application literally last Friday. I hope that any of your listeners apply. I think that Luis Ortiz and all the folks like Lindsay Flores and all the folks at LPB are wonderful. I ended up getting selected. I got $25K to make my third short film, Joyride, and so then in between both of those projects was literally the second script I ever wrote, or the first script I ever wrote was this film called La Sad Boy. And it was the story itself was done in collaboration with Georgie Goico, who's Puerto Rican. To all my Boricuas out there, sending you love. And I ended up being the screenwriter of that. And the whole idea was a day in the life, right? Someone's birthday, and all the microaggressions that we all deal with. I deal with a lot. Georgie and I bonded over this idea of like everybody who's Latinx is just Mexican in the eyes of a lot of people, including Latinx people.
Yeah.
So and then that full circle journey to just like say, like, I love Mexicans so much and I appreciate all of them so much, and like my partner is Mexican, like not Mexican American, like Mexican. And I think for me that whole idea of like when someone says I'm Mexican, like before when I was young, I'd be like, I'm not Mexican, you know, like, and it would be that kind of visceral reaction. And then I actually caught myself. You know how you have those moments where you actually are out of body? And I was like, you know what? That's fucked up. Like, there's nothing wrong with being Mexican. And that visceral reaction makes it seem like there is. So then I reworked that, you know, in myself, and I go, I'm actually not Mexican. I grew up in a primarily Mexican neighborhood, but I'm Nicaraguan-American. And then there's that whole beautiful thing where people, even when you tell them what your background is, will say, oh, this is Edwin, he's Guatemalan. Oh, this is Edwin, you know, he's Costa Rican. Oh, this is Edwin, he's Honduran. And I'm like, oh, homie, no, homie. Just, you could even say I'm Central American. I'm cool with that.
It's funny. And, you know, you're part of like a collective. Mm-hmm. So I just want to give you an opportunity to like shout out who you are, what y'all do. Like,
let's see. So I am part of Cundina Collective, which is comprised of three of us. So myself, Angela Pedraza, who is Colombian American, who's also a writer, director, producer, and Evelyn Martinez, who is Mexican American, who's also a writer, director, producer. So we're three writer, director, producers who are kind of navigating this landscape and thinking about what it means to imbue the word Latinx in your work, and also thinking about the ways in which inherently we're Latinx regardless of what we write or what we do, right? Meaning like Cundina Collective, like a Cundina or a Tanda is something that was pioneered in the Southwest by the Latinx community as a bankless money savings account that was based on trust, you know. And so we loved that concept of a Cundina, of the individual pieces creating a whole. And then we were thinking, I'm like, well, what is the Cundina, right? Like, we can pull together money, but money alone isn't really what we need to make films. So it's a matter of pulling together money, resources, equipment, talent, right? Creating a mini writer's room, talking about a piece, conceptualizing it. And so for us, we're trying to think about in this space, right? In this space, in this media landscape that's being created. And right now with the pandemic, you know, this idea of scarcity, right? And how we're moving into an industry where the scarcity will be even more prevalent because certain people will hire specific people, and we're going to start losing this diverse kind of aspect to what we do. And to that, I say, like, fuck that. Like, for me, I'm like, let's build our own tables. Instead of me waiting for someone to invite me to the table, like, let's build our own tables. And for me, that involves not only the Latinx community, that involves the LGBTQ community, that involves like basically anybody BIPOC, right? Which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. So for us, we're kind of looking at, and allies as well, and allyship is so critical for this. So for us, we're kind of looking at what does it mean to stamp Latinx onto a production company, right? Or a collective. And so we're trying to really figure that out. And I don't think that we've landed on a specific answer, but I think what ends up coming down, what it comes down to is collaboration. Like, what we want to do is collaborate with all people. We want to center stories with corazón, you know? And I think that's what we're always looking for in terms of what projects we take on. And outside of that, you know, so La Sad Boy was actually created through a model that we were experimenting with. So I made La Sad Boy, we made La Sad Boy with $800 and a shit ton of favors, you know? And I'm so grateful for everybody who worked on that film. I think that moment in my young career, because I still consider myself pretty young in my career, made me realize that I could do it, and I could do it the way that I would like to do it, and I could tell narratives that mattered to me and that I saw myself in, you know. So there's that, and then we're also working on the soon-to-be digital co-writing space called Work, like capital WERQ, as a digital co-writing space, because we know how hard writing is, you know, as well. And we're wanting to create a digital space where writers can actually talk, where we can explore like prompts and work towards something, right? So those two things are kind of like the main collectives. The other collective I'll shout out to is the Centam Collective, the Central American Collective on IG, which Susan Garcia started. I think the fact that a lot of what they center is Central American erasure in media and just the ways in which terms kind of make people invisible. So yeah, I think those are the main things that I've kind of aligned myself with and I'm thinking about.
And yeah, that sort of like leads me to my next question. What themes, what stories like do you constantly see coming up in your work? Just looking at the stuff you love to write about, the stories that attract you, is there like a through line that you find is like unique to you?
I am really huge on excavating emotional inheritance. I'm a firm believer. So I get new agey. Let me get new agey with you, Ruben, if you'll let me.
Yeah.
I was told once by this astrologer that my bloodline, right, in the placements of the planets and in my chart, that my bloodline actually gave birth to their antidote, right? Like, meaning myself, that I was sent here to do the work, to be that healing agent in like the lives of my family. And what I want to say is, for me, I'm a firm believer that that's not a singular story. That is not just my chart. I really genuinely believe that all families give birth to their antidote, right? And so for me, I think emotional inheritance is such a huge theme in my work because, I mean, from the moment a woman is born, like all the ova she's ever going to have in her life are already in her, which means that half of your genetic material is the age of your mother, which means that half of your mother is the age of your grandmother, and going through, I know that there's a lot of work that we do as a society and as psychologists and as therapists that talk about the way trauma is transferred through the DNA. And so one of the big themes that kind of sews together my work, and I'm sorry I get emotional thinking about it, is this idea that we have the power to retroactively heal all those pieces that are a thread in us, I feel like we could pass healing through our bloodline even when people don't exist in our reality anymore. And I aim for that every time I work on anything I'm writing, any film, any play, any poem. It's like constantly littered with and imbued with that spirit, and I think that that's not just my work. I know that that's the work that a lot of writers I admire and love do. I would say that my work is always at the precipice of comedy and drama, and it's because for me that's exactly what life is. It's bittersweet, it's slow like honey, but then it also stings like lemon. It has all of these layers, and nothing is ugly and nothing is beautiful. It's all one thing.
Yeah.
You take that breath of it.
Just to start sort of wrapping up, I'm always interested in who my guests, the writers that they admire. So this could be friends of yours, peers, heroes. It could be people you're stalking on Instagram who you don't know, but you just love their work. So who are some of those people for you?
Ooh, man, there's a lot of them. And so if I forget anybody, please just know that you're in my heart. I love you. For me, when I think of larger scope, like people not necessarily 1 degree away from me currently, I'm looking at Pedro Almodovar. I look at Pedro Almodovar's work, his excavation of family dynamic as something very beautiful. I know that some of his work is very intense and very painful and hard to go through. I am all about, Ruben Darío, the poet. I'm all about Pablo Neruda. Pablo Neruda has been a cornerstone of my life as a writer since I was like 9 or 10. And then when it comes to just the writers in my life that I admire, I admire Angela Pedraza so much in her stories and in the things that she wants to imbue her work with. Same with my other producing partner, Evelyn Martinez. I'm really excited for the breadth of what the work is dealing with philosophically and also in its form. Um, my soul brother Elliot Feliciano, this Boricua writer, he's amazing. Abe Zapata Jr., who I know has been a guest. I really respect Abe and his work ethic and his work and his voice. My soul sister, who I went to undergrad with, Kimberly Bautista, who also is a very strong writer and creator. And then outside of that, like I would also share, like I'm currently working on a feature with my writing partner Andrew Rosendorf, who's such a talented writer. I would say that those things are. I really appreciate that I get to see the way that they deal with the themes of living and just like what it means to be human. I would also say the last person I would throw in there would be my friend Will Monroe, who's a very talented musician, but also a very talented writer and artist. And also, you know, Ricardo Lisea, my boyfriend, who's an electronic music producer, who's very talented, just when it comes to sound and when it comes to music, and also curates really great things. For me, sound is like music is writing too. It's all kind of filed in the same place, but I'd say those are definitely writers that that come to mind. Also, a lot of the writers in my cohort that we meet, you know, twice a week and just get together and write. It'd be like, sorry, Yasi. It would be Lucas. It would be Shane. It would be all of those writers that we're all peers and we're all working with each other, and I appreciate that so much.
And, you know, where can people find you? So, like the social media plugs.
You can definitely find me on IG. My handle is at edwin.mov. Pretty easy to remember. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm just Edwin Alexis on Twitter. I'm most active on IG. I'll mention though.
I asked my guests to help me title the podcast, so their episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. And you can put as many words as you want in the blank. You can move them all around. Just whatever feels true to you, the type of writing you do, the conversation, just whatever feels right in the moment. And I also use it as a recruitment tool. So if other people identify the same way, they know where to find.
Okay, I'm going to go hard. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do this. Still that bitch, queer, Nicaraguan-American, Latinx writer.
Love it. That's perfect.
I know that this time is really difficult. I know that this time is really hard on everybody, but just know that there's so much love to all of you. Like all of the writers. I know that writing already is a solitary medium, but it's so beautiful to know that the writing is happening like in all of our homes right now. And I can't wait to be able to go see a play or go see your film, go see anything. And I also wanted to say, like, I just finished my third film, Joyride, with Latino Public Broadcasting, and it should be premiering later this summer, July. I can't necessarily say where yet, but yeah, I look forward to sharing that piece with you. It's one of the most intimate pieces I've shared to date. Again, dealing with the loss of my mother and my grandmother. So thank you so much, Ruben, for creating this space.
Yeah.